Okay, hi everyone. My name is Nicola Komninos and I'm the Group Chief Risk Officer of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. And it's my privilege to be having a very interesting conversation with Dr. Azar Jammine today about the IRMSA 2021 South Africa Risk Report. I sit on the IRMSA Risk Intelligence Committee and I am very privileged to be having this conversation with Dr. Jammine to specifically talk about the report and all the different risks we are facing in the country. Dr. Jammine has a very impressive resume. He's been the Director and Chief Economist of the Econometrix for the last 35 years. He has played a very significant role in South Africa, both locally and internationally, commenting on international economic and local economic affairs, and has conducted various presentations, both internationally and locally, on the topic. He is currently also a member of the Advisory Council of the National Advisory Council of Innovation, which is a specific council and a body of experts who has been appointed by the Department of Science and Technology. And so he plays a very important role there. And in addition to that, is an executive of the Independent Schools Association, as that's very important to look after the future of education in our country. So Dr. Jammine, I'm very privileged to be having this conversation with you, talking about the IRMSA 2021 South Africa Risk Report, and specifically getting your thoughts on all the particular matters that our country is facing at this point in time. So let's get right into it. And I think the first question really is, how would you describe the current local and global risk landscape and outlook?
The current risk landscape, both globally and domestically, is actually quite acute, in that there are a number of various risks that are in a way unprecedented and that actually pose substantial risks to the downside, mainly in terms of what can be achieved. South Africa is highly dependent on the global economy, and to the extent that the global economy carries significant risks, those are also transferred to South Africa, and one should not minimize them. There is a tendency in South Africa to focus principally on domestic risks, such as the deteriorating fiscal situation, such as the high levels of corruption that are eating up resources in the country, and as well as the fact that there is insufficient number of skills and education in the country, and a lack of infrastructural development. But one mustn't also overlook the fact that if the global economy suffers badly, South Africa will tend to endure the same problems. And we've seen that in the case of the COVID-19 crisis, which has impacted very, very severely on the global economy, and through that, it's also impacted just as severely on the South African economy. And the solutions to the one would have an impact on solutions to the other as well.
I'm reminded of the piece of work that you did with us earlier this year, when we were specifically looking at the local and global economic scenarios. And I'm very grateful for the insights you were able to share with us at the JSE, and certainly also how that fed into the scenario analysis work that we did, specifically just talking about both the positive and the negative aspects, because certainly there aren't just the risks, but there are also opportunities in this specific environment. And I quite enjoyed the more optimistic and opportunity elements that you brought to the fore in that piece of work. And then the second question, Dr. Azar, is what is the top risk that you are dealing with in your specific role? And I suppose as an economist that deals with local and global issues, that's quite a tricky one to have to ask you to just choose one. But please do choose one, and also let us know how that's impacting the achievement of the strategy and performance, maybe in particularly for your company at Econometrix.
I would suggest there are many, yes. Yeah. And it's very difficult, but if I have to highlight one at the moment, it is the deterioration in South Africa's fiscal situation and the huge increase that has occurred in the country's debt levels and the risk that that carries of a major debt crisis in the longer term, and the fact that the South African government could ultimately default on the debts that it owes to borrowers, both domestically and internationally. That, I would say, is the single big thing dealing with right now.
Let me go on to the next one. Specifically, when we're looking at the IRMSA 2021 risk reports for South Africa, that resonates the most with you and that you can share some of your personal insights and strategies on. So we have identified 12 top risks and we shared those with you. So maybe if you can reflect some of those risks and which in particular resonates with you, and some personal experiences that you'd like to share with us relating to those risks.
I would suggest that this is a very comprehensive and a very appropriate set of risks that has been put out, starting with the whole aspect of leadership. There is a perception in the country, and interestingly, I've had a personal experience of this in a private webinar this morning with some leading businessmen and political and economic analysts whose view is that at the moment, at the heart of the problems that South Africa faces specifically, and this is not related to the international environment, is the fact that the politics is playing a far bigger role than economic priorities. And that even though, and even if a lot of the economic problems are recognized, they are not being confronted primarily because of political interference and political imperatives. And we're talking here of the case, for example, of corruption and state capture, the failure to deal with that appropriately. We're talking about state-owned enterprises and the manner in which ideology seems to be cutting across our ability to deal with the weaknesses of SOEs. And even in issues such as climate change, there is also a reluctance on the part of the government to really confront some of the issues, which, by the way, present us with enormous opportunities for growing the economy if we were to pursue those. And talking about opportunities, the big challenge in South Africa is that with the kind of disruptive technologies that are emerging, the way forward and the way to succeed is to actually exploit those opportunities provided by those disruptive technologies. But that involves a high level of education and skills, especially in the new virtual kind of environment that South Africa is entering. And the problem that we face here is our educational profile is lacking very severely, especially in the areas of mathematics and science and cognitive ability. And our inability to actually deal with difficult problems, technical problems, it makes us highly dependent on know-how from the rest of the world, which in turn forces us to be recolonized if we want to proceed and progress. And that in itself creates new tensions. The other one linked to that is that because of the inability of the major portion of the population to really add value and to innovate and be creative, that in turn leads to a high level of unemployment in the world, in the kind of world of today that we are leading with. Because in that kind of environment, you are dealing with people who are able to earn money because of the skills that they can actually contribute to solving problems. And we are lacking in that. And what it does lead to is the majority of people are unable to gain gainful employment and an income earning ability as a consequence of this. And that leads to high levels of inequality. The perception of elite is exacerbated through corrupt activity as well.
Sure, Dr. Jammine, that was a lot to think about. But I think if I just pull that back to the top risk you mentioned that you worried about in terms of the debt levels in the country, and then talk about the specific things that you highlighted in terms of the opportunity in that, and embracing the technology that's facing us, and the technology era, and your specific involvement in as an executive of the Independent Schools Association. I suppose the opportunity in that is really just the upliftment on the education side, and sort of changing that whole debt cycle already in the minds of our children in school.
If we were to succeed in dealing appropriately with the educational issues in South Africa, and unfortunately these are of a very long-term nature, one would suddenly see a whole cohort of people rising up, innovating, creating, and being able to produce productively and efficiently and contribute towards society in general. The growth rates, when we talk about risks, I said most of them are on the downside, but there is a massive potential upside risk in the South African economy if we were to get things right on the educational front, and especially to unravel the opportunities that are available in the new technologies. I think that at the southern tip of Africa, where the ability to transfer skills is probably better than in most other African countries, I think the sky's the limit, theoretically. But until and unless we come to grips with the growing debt problems of the country, we are going to be hamstrung and will not be able to turn this around. It's a little bit of a catch-22 situation, because the one way of actually coming to grips with the debt situation is to generate much higher economic growth, and that will bring in the tax revenues that are able to be used to actually reduce debt levels. But that's a tall order within the time frame that we're looking at in terms of the debt crisis exploding before our eyes in the next few years.
So what specific valuable insights have you gleaned from the current global pandemic that we've been faced? And how has it impact on the specific strategy? So potentially how you have approached your business differently at Econometrix, and the work that you do across the global and local space on the economic side?
There's no question that one has had to adapt quite significantly and fairly dramatically to the new kind of environment. In my particular instance, I've had to become accustomed to communicating virtually to a far greater extent than ever before. When it really hit me was when I got in touch with Leila Fourie to discuss this project for the JSE, and was unable to ever meet her personally, but just discuss things as we are doing right now virtually. And that was an opening for me at that time of the new world and I've been forced to do many presentations now through this medium. So that's the way in which it's affected my environment. And I would like to think that we've actually taken advantage of this in actually increasing the number of the amount of communication that we've had with clients through this medium, by means of holding regular webinars and being able, to which far more of our clients have actually been connecting with us than was the case before, when they would physically have to go to a particular venue to actually hear me or to discuss with me. So that's been the way, the manner in which in my own particular business I've had to adapt significantly. I can't say that I always find it the optimal way of dealing, and I do miss personal communication and personal interaction through means other than just a laptop. But the environment has forced me to work this way. It's also brought some problems as well, and some challenges, in that most of my staff now prefer working from home, and yet we've been operating from offices and property that I've got a share in. Now I've had to adapt in terms of trying to find new tenants to lease the property in order to keep it going, which is a new challenge, and it's not that easy in this kind of environment. I've been in the fortunate situation, and the kind of business that I'm in, I have been able to adapt. There are, however, some other businesses which I would submit probably people have not been able to adapt quite as easily, possibly through lack of innovative ability, but also because of the nature of the business. I have a particular sympathy with people in the hospitality and restaurants and leisure businesses, because it's quite difficult to overcome some of the impediments that have come to the fore. But it's also highlighted to me how important the new technologies have become, and how some of the business environment has actually been booming as a consequence of the COVID-19 crisis and what's erupted. And no less than, you don't have to look very far other than to look at the JSE, and for that matter, international stock markets, to see just how divergent the experiences of different industries have been in terms of their response to the COVID-19 crisis. It's initially when the COVID-19 crisis erupted, and when I wrote the report, we were looking at U-shaped, V-shaped, L-shaped scenarios, but more recently, everyone is talking about the K-shaped scenario, where some are shooting the lights out and others are suffering very badly. So you've got the kind of a K shape emerging. And that is a true reflection of the kind of variety and divergence of risks that the new world that we're facing is now involved in.
Yeah, so definitely when we did the piece of work with you, it was more LVU, and now there's a K in there, which is talking about that 90% economy. Some companies are just doing so well during this period, and others are really struggling. And I'll still remember the day when we phoned you to talk about that piece of project. We were still in the building though, and I was phoning you on my cell phone, but we were preparing and we were already doing our business continuity testing to move off-site. So it really has been unprecedented times, very interesting times. So then my last question for you is really just how you would categorize the South African geopolitical landscape, and what are the global themes that are impacting on South Africa?
The South African geopolitical landscape is obviously fraught at the moment with division in terms of the kind of solutions required to deal with the low growth environment in which we're in. On the one hand, you've got those who believe that the problems arise out of the growth in inequality and the historical legacies that have to be overcome through massive government intervention to control and regulate the activities of business and to kind of force a new environment that would be preferable onto the South African economy. The other group say, no, the way to do it is to loosen up, to open up the economy to market forces and to force competitive processes that way to generate the creativity and innovative necessity that is required during difficult times. And unfortunately, we're not making progress because within the government itself, there is this huge discrepancy between those favoring state involvement and those favoring market-oriented environment. To some extent, we are actually starting to see the same pressures evolving all around the world. Many of these are derived from the fact that over many decades now, through the evolution of technology and the evolution of financial innovation, we've had an explosion of debt, personal debt, corporate debt, and public debt like never before. And the solution to try and deal with that debt has been for central banks to print money like never before, and for governments to embark upon still more fiscal stimulus than before to generate growth. And this is resulting in a situation where a lot of the money that's being created is being concentrated in the hands of ever fewer people, mainly in the financial sector, and is not penetrating and going through to assisting the poorer sections of society. And it's creating an environment of more and more inequality, where the merits of capitalism as a mechanism to provide innovation, productivity, and efficiency are being lost in the face of what people see as the rise in the level of inequality, which is not due to the capitalistic system itself so much as due to the kind of institutions around which capitalism has been engulfed in recent times. As a result, we are seeing an increase in populism, an increase in pressures for nationalism and isolationism. And in the United States right now, with the very tense presidential election, this is being manifested very clearly between those forces of isolation and those working towards a more globalized environment, but one that tries to combat the rise in inequality that is taking place. It's a very challenging environment, and superimposed on that now, you've got the exponential growth of technology, which is threatening to replace personal manpower with machines and create more and more unemployment, and which in itself is creating a pushback. The other side of it is also the recognition that the exponential rate of technological progress is also imposing a lot of strains on the world's resources and leading to things such as climate change. And there's obviously a pushback on that itself. These are huge risks, but they also provide massive opportunities. When we're talking about climate change, there is a huge new world out there that could develop and evolve to try and limit the growth of the threat to the world global environment. Waste management is also a massive area of opportunity. And then, of course, on the healthcare side, we see now new challenges in the form of needing to find vaccines, but also develop healthcare services in a manner that actually overcomes high levels of inequality in healthcare, which had previously prevailed.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jammine. I think all that's left for me to say is I think you do such a phenomenal job, both locally and internationally, in understanding the very complex socioeconomic environment that faces us, and helping us ready ourselves to identify exactly that, all the risks as well as the opportunities that present themselves. I think the one, just thinking about the digital divide and how that specifically impacts the schooling system, and your roles at the various advisory councils and executive committees, where you would be highlighting both those challenges but also the opportunities. I'm comfortable that I'm sure you are doing an excellent job there to make sure that we get South Africa through these trying times and benefit and leverage some of those opportunities. And I'm very pleased to hear that you are embracing your team working remotely and looking at alternative options for leasing out your premises. I think you really are forward thinking and really an inspiration in terms of how you've embraced the use of technology in your role. So thank you so much for your time.
It's been a pleasure and an honor to be involved with you. Thank you.